Oh, Yang Gang. Yeah, today I want to jump in and talk to you a little bit about polling, especially with the poll in New Hampshire from Monmouth came out Yang at 3%. It's not the result that we wanted, and we're like, what's going on? A lot of us are going like, no, I haven't seen Klobuchar supporters, I haven't seen Biden supporters, and all this other stuff. And so, for understanding that and developing a bit of resilience through this is I want to talk a little bit about a concept that's called in psychotherapy that's called cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance happens is like when you have a person and there's a truth. Let's say maybe that like they're abused or something like that, and or they have a relationship with somebody who hurt them, but there's this dissonance between their emotions for that person. So they might be like, I really love this person, and then there's a part of them that's like, ooh, that's not really fitting in with me. But this suppressed emotion is not being seen or understood, and it's like kind of willfully ignored, but there's this dissonance that's created in the person's behavior. So that's kind of like I don't know, semi-accurate definition of cognitive dissonance. But I think the essential thing that it comes down to is that there's like this relationship between a person's thoughts where some of them are suppressed, they're impacting behavior, but it's not being fully recognized. And I think when you look at what polling is like and what the media, how in general is also treating Andrew Yang, is that there's this, and it always happens in grassroots campaigns, is that there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. So the way it looks like for us probably is that we see so much online support that's very loyal, and we also see in person, in real life support. You see droves of people coming out to, um, you know, the campaign stops, like rallies and talks and things like that. There's real impact happening, right? But they're somehow not showing up in polls. And so I think the way for us to understand that is that there's like almost like an American self-gaslighting going on. There's a story that, oh, this thing is not happening. This Yang Gang thing is not happening. This Andrew Yang thing is not happening, not happening. But everything, on the ground actually in action real life, because, like online life is real life, like in a way, like Twitter enthusiasm is real enthusiasm. Like all those people are real. They're not bots. That creates like this dissonance between what the talking heads are saying, like the people higher up and people who have platforms and having a voice, and then what's happening at a grassroots level. And of course, to some extent, this also, or to a large extent, this also applies to grassroots people like Bernie Sanders. It also applied to Donald Trump, who's a grassroots candidate. Let's face it, he's the greatest grassroots candidate in America right now is Donald Trump. Right. So I think what we're seeing is this cognitive dissonance thing that's happening. And when, and usually a lot of the reason why cognitive dissonance happens is because of fear. So even when you can see that fear even from the mainstream media, and you can also see it from like even people you might expect to be pretty sympathetic to Yang, like burners, who lately have become, pretty vitriolic about Andrew Yang all of a sudden. Like they've always had like this kind of but now they're really pouring it on. And probably a lot of that is because of anxiety, because they're having a rise, but they're also seeing the rise of Andrew Yang, and they're like, uh-oh. Right. So, cognitive dissonance. And yeah, it's kind of like essentially a self-gaslighting. So I think my 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 statement is kind of to the Yang Gang is like, don't let yourself fall for the gaslighting. Like, pay attention to what is actually really happening around you. Those polls and metrics don't actually have anything or they can influence. They influence momentum, but they aren't the momentum itself, right? They are like, they represent a part of a system that's in denial of the truth. And I think, you know, in Andrew Yang, we have the most truth-speaking candidate in the race, for as far as I'm concerned. So it's also logical that the most amount of suppression would come. But there's also at a point at which when we break through that resistance, then everything opens up. Okay. So, yeah, even if we happen to not make the debate, I would say, like, don't get your heads down. The cognitive dissonance is real, and ultimately it may, like, keep the boots on the ground. And then also a reminder that there's a bigger story than even an Andrew Yang 2020 win. The bigger story is also about creating this sustainable network of people that are involved and have learned to work with each other around these values and keep evolving that. Because ultimately, whether Andrew Yang gets into office, the Yang Gang still needs to be active, still needs to be available to get through people through to Congress and do all these other things. Even if Andrew doesn't get in office, people need to keep there needs to keep being effort to push things forward regardless of that, because Andrew Yang is an amazing candidate, but the policy and platform is also its own thing that wants to be alive. And regardless of whether Andrew is running or not, we will know that there will be other candidates in the future that come, and step forward and take up the mantle. So really the 2 points are, like, pay attention to the cognitive dissonance, realize America is self-gaslighting itself, and don't fall for the gaslighting. And the second point is, like, understand that, even with IO approaching, we're still building for the long term. There are short-term goals, but there's also a long-term game that immediate loss isn't losing the war.